Chris Allen is a fantasy analyst and content coordinator at Fantasy Life. He's also the organizer of the Cookout Group. He's an engineering nerd, a dad, a runner, a dad runner, a brewer, and a fantasy football meteorologist. These are his late round perspectives. This episode is sponsored by Underdog. Underdog is the easiest place to play fantasy sports, and they give you a ton of different games and contests to choose from each week. If you think drafting is over because the season started, you'd be wrong. You can draft teams over there each week in literal minutes. Right now, if you sign up on Underdog with promo code LATEROUND, you not only get a deposit offer of up to $1,000, but you also get access to my rest of season rankings. Those will be emailed to you once you sign up. But when you sign up, you have to use promo code LATEROUND. Head to UnderdogFantasy.com or download the app to do so. Again, that's promo code LATEROUND. Now back to the show. I went for a run today and I was like, man, that's fun that I'm running and I'm going to be talking to Chris later today.
Man, I'm jealous because I don't have as much time to be physically active during the football season because I burn the candle on both ends, have the full-time job, and then doing this. The times for me to get out and run around and actually just, be an adult for a little while, those come few and far in between. So I'm super jealous, but good for you, man. Honestly, I know that Leone has come down and done a couple of races with you. I would love to get down and do that at some point in the future.
Yeah, man. Yeah. I've been dealing with some low back pain as all of us deal with as we age, right? Like it's like for me, it's like the butt to lower back stuff going on right now, with when I'm.
That's what I got too. Yeah.
It's awful. It's awful. And so like, even today I had to stop at one point. I hate, there's nothing more demoralizing than going for like a zone 2 type run. Like it wasn't even like a hard run and having to stop because I'm like feeling this pain going on. I'm like, I'm not going to push it because why would I push it? There's absolutely zero reason to push this right now. I'm not even training for anything,
Exactly. And what is up with all this stretching stuff? I remember like 20 years ago, not having to worry about any of that stuff. I would just, I just want to go to the gym or I want to work out. Yeah. Let's just go and then just start pumping iron, or I'll just go and run for 3 miles or whatever the case may be. Now it's been so much more about getting my body ready before I even start doing physical activity, just things I didn't consider, but that's the part of getting old.
Yeah. I've never felt older in my life than like the last like year or so. Like I threw out my back last year for the first time in my life whenever I picked up my son. Like I literally just picked him up and then I'm like, I can't walk right now. Like this is what's going on. And I think back to like, I remember I was like, I got into running. Like I didn't really run that much in like high school and stuff like that. And then I got into running in college. And it's not like I've been like a very, very like hardcore runner even since then. I've been kind of off and on, but I've tried to stay pretty consistent, over the last couple of years. But I remember I did my first ever 5K. I was like 20 years old, right? And I went and I was running at like a 6:30 pace at the time because I was 20 years old. And I went and I ran this thing and I was under 21 minutes for the 5K. And I literally just got there and ran, didn't stretch, did nothing, felt fine afterwards. Like I miss those days of just being able to do that. So anyone listening right now that's in your 20s, cherish the time. Cherish it.
Yes, definitely.
Because my goodness, it changes. And then I know the people listening who are in their 40s and 50s and even older, they're like this youngin saying this stuff when he's, not even like it's only going to get worse. I know it's only going to get worse. Mm-hmm. Anyway, man, I'm really pumped to have you on. I like to start this off with every guest by just kind of getting a rundown of start to finish of like what got you into fantasy football, where you stopped, along the way, where you're at now, all that good stuff. So give us the story, man.
The start is actually folks like yourself. Back in the 2011, 2012 timeframe, I was working with a crew over at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. It's where I work at. And I got invited to my very first fantasy football league. So that was roughly like 12 years ago. So for folks that are out there that are like, oh my gosh, Chris Allen, this analyst, like he must have been doing this forever. Nope. It's only been just a shade over a decade that I've really gotten into fantasy football. But in my first league, I was made the commissioner for the league. absolutely awful. I just remember my first round pick. I think it was Ray Rice. It was my first pick. After that, I don't remember anything. I did so terrible, and I did so bad to the point where I was like, why is this so bad? Like, why am I performing so terribly in this league? And once you draft your first roster and you really catch the bug of fantasy football, I started just diving into as much content as possible. I think the first place that I went to was ESPN because that was the more popular site at the time. Found some guy by the name of Matthew Berry that was putting out podcasts and talking about different strategies and all of that. But then afterwards, I started hearing other analysts named across some of the podcasts I was listening to. I found the NFL Network podcast, found Sigmund Blue, like all of these other guys. And that was really what enamored me with the industry as a whole, because you hear so many different perspectives, you hear so many different stories and personalities. And at least for me personally, I really started to jive with a lot of the way that people took in content or the way that they process the game. For folks that don't know, I'm an engineer, been an engineer for the past like 20-ish or so years. At different stops along the way, like from an industry standpoint, from academia to industry, now as a civil servant. But being able to use data to understand this game that we play or this thing that we talk about on a daily basis was so illuminating for me that I was like, man, I feel like I could do this. I feel like I have the technical background or the understanding of what these folks are talking about that I could be able to contribute, but I just didn't know how. And one of the folks that at least helped encourage me to start writing and putting my name out there was Matt Harmon. I was actually in a fan league. So talking with the guys over at NFL Network, they were doing if you listen to the show, you get into this league with them. And I was in a league with both him and Matt Franciscovich. Nice. And I had the idea for writing about weather based off of a game. It was in the 2017 timeframe. I think it was week 7, week 8. It was the Ravens going up against Washington. And I think that was around the same time that Deshaun Jackson was still one of the players that you wanted to target. And in that game specifically, he was supposed to go up against Ravens cornerback Sharice Wright. And everybody was wanting to target him. They knew he was a poor corner. Yeah. Deshaun Jackson, being Deshaun Jackson, was supposed to smoke him and so on and so forth. Goes out, they play the game, and I believe Djax only had something along the lines of like 4 for 30, 5 for 60, something along those lines. Serviceable wide receiver 2-3, depending on your league settings, but didn't have the boom game that we expected. And I remember listening to the Football Guys podcast and listening to Sigmund Bloom, one of the goats of the industry.
Yes, sir.
But right afterwards, I think he made just an offhanded comment of, well, it was windy in the stadium. And so that was probably why we didn't see a lot of Deshaun Jackson, or at least didn't get the production out of him. And that was the first like aha or like epiphany type of moment where I looked at it, I was like, well, couldn't we study that? Isn't there a way that we could collect data to say whether or not high winds or those like the elements impact the game? And so, like I said earlier, just based off of my technical know-how, started pulling data, scraping stuff like scraping weather sites and looking at performance based off of what the weather was supposed to be and how we would approach the game. And just threw together an article, averaging some stuff here and there, showing the highs and lows and differences between players that you might want to target, might not want to, and then just put it out there. I mean, I wasn't writing for any website. It was just something that I thought would be kind of a niche area to do, like to provide some added value to the industry. I mean, especially talking with Matt Harmon, because that was more or less the infancy days of reception perception. Mm-hmm. And it was like, okay, well, how can I sound different? Right. And of course, I look different than a lot of the other fantasy analysts out there, but what is my added value? I'd just be another voice out there talking about tight ends and my rankings and sleepers and busts and all this other stuff. Yeah. But I thought at least with this, it would allow me my own sort of avenue to say, like, this is the thing I'm really going to dive into. Now, of course, along the way, I've really gotten into the weeds, of course, of trying to figure out how best to better contextualize weather stuff. With my background, I'm a modeling and simulation, so like done a bunch of finite element analysis, like throughout grad school, and really trying to like model things from a computational dynamic standpoint. I've actually modeled like stadiums and looked at like weather patterns going across it to see, like I've really gotten into the weeds about a lot of this stuff. Yeah, and I've probably am on an FBI watch list because I've looked at how like stadiums are built and all of that. I've tried to Google down to like what's the size and like how the azimuth or how like the stuff is angled. But that was my entryway into it. But after I got a sense of how to structure articles, how to apply my own voice to things, it really started to blossom from there. And the number of stops along the way, I've been at 4 for 4. I legitimately remember, I was thinking about this last night. I remember I was driving up to a Dynasty startup draft up in Columbus. And I remember walking up to a couple of my friends and being like, hey guys, don't say anything. But I applied to Numberfire and I got the job. And everybody started freaking out. They were like, "Oh man, you could be working Numberfire." So I've been so blessed to work at so many different websites so far in my time contributing over at Establish the Run. So many good places I've been able to. Football Guys, of course, like working with Sigmund Bloom and the rest of the folks over there. But now finding a home at Fantasy Life. Has really been like my ultimate goal, because working across a number of sites has been great. And don't get me wrong, like seeing your name, like I still get text messages now from friends and family whenever my name pops up on the Yahoo app, like because when they post the articles and all that, like Chris Allen like says blah 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 blah. I'm like, that's still really cool. But being able to find a home at Fantasy Life has really been my goal, to be able to consolidate all of my work, but also being able to work around just so many good analysts, from Ian Hartitz and Dwayne McFarlane to like talking with Pete Overzet and pretty much everybody else that works there. So I don't want to say this is like the final chapter of my career here in the industry, but at least for right now, knowing where I belong and knowing I also have a place within the industry has really been like my goal since I started. And so it's fun to finally get there.
Yeah. I mean, it's something that I think people kind of take for granted at times, like when you just have that spot. You know, I was at Numberfire for a really long time and FanDuel and stuff, and I was just able, it's nice to just have that as a home. And now obviously doing the Lay Around Fantasy Football thing, it's just nice to like have that standard goal, that thing that you're working on, that everyone else is working on as well with the same team, and not getting things mixed up because you're doing this for this site and this for this site and all that kind of stuff. I think what you brought up though, this is more for like aspiring analysts and stuff, is the point of differentiation that you're talking about as you sort of entered the space, and you're like, okay, I've seen that folks like Harmon right now is working on reception perception. There's clearly like you need a thing to sort of like get yourself, you know, embedded and inserted into the conversation a little bit easier or more easily, right? And then once you kind of establish yourself, I would tell people all the time whenever they would send in samples and stuff to Numberfire, and they'd like have a rankings list with some commentary. I was like, my thought, I wasn't this rude to them whenever I would respond, but my thought was like, no one knows who you are right now, so they don't care about your rankings. You know, like you have to establish yourself as here's years and years of, you know, like statistical backing and analysis that I've done that has proven to work, and a process that's proven to work. Now you know that that's all going into my rankings. But if it's a random, like if I were to meet someone on the street who says, hey, here's a rankings list that I put together, I'm like, okay, like I don't know anything about what your process is and how you really analyze this game. You know, that's not going to do it for me at the end of the day, you know?
I'm thinking about just the image comes to mind of, you know, how I don't know if it's the same way now, but back in the day of people moving out to LA or something along those lines with the dreams of making it big in the movie industry, and they walk around with scripts to just shove in front of directors' faces. I'm always thinking about that, but like, here, have you seen my rankings?
Yeah, right.
Have you seen this? And just like, I don't know who you are. I don't know how you came up with any of this stuff. Like, this is not compelling. But I would say, to your point though, and I've seen this posted by his name is Jeff Bell. He works over at Football Guys. An awesome guy, and actually he lives like just up the road in Columbus from me. But he's put the point out there that when you make content, you should not be making content for other analysts. You should be making that content either for yourself or for the larger community. Yeah. Of course, it's cool. Like if you get the famed Evan Silva bump, if he happens to catch your stuff and repost it, and it's awesome. It's awesome to see folks like yourself or Harmon or whomever retweet the things that you're putting out. But really, your goal as a content creator or as an analyst you should be doing the things that you're passionate about. And then the followers will come along the way. Because when I was tweeting about weather effects, and when I was putting out some of my work early, that's when people start to interact with you, because you're putting your thoughts out there. If you're just putting your rankings out there and just saying, all right, well, it's week 12, here are my running back rankings, without really any sort of avenue for people to interact with your work, then it's just like, all right, well, I'm gonna take a look at your rankings, and then I'm gonna go look at John Paulson's rankings, or I'm gonna look at John Daigle's rankings, or I'm gonna look at all this other stuff. Like, what is about the thing that you're doing that allows you to separate, that also invites the level of discussion that gets people a chance to know who you are past your content? Because if you're not doing that, then you really are just going to be another voice that's out there. You're going to be another one of those people that's out there on Twitter, putting your stuff out there, but really not getting the level of notoriety that you would want. So if you are an aspiring content creator, you do want to try and find your footing in this industry. Again, think about what it is that you want out of doing it. Right. And instead of like the money and the fame and all of that, because I'll tell you, like, not a lot of either of those two there, but still, I mean, if you do want to try and do this and you are passionate about it, like, that should show in the work that you're putting out.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I get stopped everywhere I go, because of the late round podcast, No, I mean, like, here's the truth too with like ranking stuff, is that like, if you're putting together rankings and like that's your baseline of content, it's quite literally my least favorite thing to do is put together rankings. Like of all content pieces, the thing I want to do least, and I'm sorry to the patrons out there who, are digging into my rankings and stuff each week.
I'm subscribing now.
Yeah. I still do them because I know that they're important and there's a place for them, but there's just not that much nuance that goes into that kind of thing. And there's a lot of groupthink with them, and there's just a lot of, and it's honestly just insanely boring to do. Like, when you're ranking, especially like dynasty rankings, you're ranking 200 guys, and then it's like, all right, like once you get into like the 100th overall player, even that quickly, you're splitting hairs. I mean, it's just not as like entertaining as like sitting down. And I know I'm preaching the choir with you, but sitting down and like digging into the data, doing a study, and discovering things that haven't been discovered yet. Like, that to me is why we do this, is because it's so freaking fun to do that. Now, another thing that you've helped create and bring forth in the fantasy space, you mentioned earlier that you look different compared to other fantasy analysts, especially probably at that time, is the Cookout. Can you just talk about the Cookout a little bit and what it's about? I've learned about it over the last few years, and I just think it's an amazing thing that you're doing. And I think that the more people that we can, reach out to and speak of the organization to, the better. So let everyone know what the Cookout's all about.
Right. The Cookout is a group of minority content creators. And actually, let me take that back, or I guess redefine it, because it's not just content creators. It's minorities that are working in the sports media industry. So it's essentially across all sports, all sorts of types of positions that you would have. So, of course, you see a lot more of the people that are forward facing. So folks like myself, whether it's Marcus Grant, whether it's Mr. like Ray Garvin, I mean, any of the folks that you would typically see on social media promoting their work on a day-to-day basis. But of course, there are a number of jobs that even I'm learning about that are available in the industry that might be able to, that could be serviced by somebody that is a minority, that I just honestly I didn't know about. Working at Fantasy Life has really opened my eyes to the different levels of, I guess, rigor that goes into a lot of these shows. I know for yourself, I mean, I cannot do the things that you do in terms of being able to create a concise podcast inside of 15 to 20 minutes, because I can ramble on about a singular topic for about pretty much all of that 15 to 20 minutes. Yeah. But for working at Fantasy Life, we have a number of producers. We got people working on social media to put out stuff. I mean, all of those bits and pieces that as a singular content creator, you don't really take into account. But those are all things and skill sets that other people outside of the norm have. And so when we put together the Cookout group, it was really just to allow people the platform to say that, yeah, I'm here. I'm out here. I'm trying to promote my work or at least be a part of this industry. And it's really not about the level of experience. It's about trying to foster that level of communication between other minorities that are in the industry, want to be a part of it, and really want to try and make their way in this space. And so we use it as a resource group to not only say, hey, let's band together and let's start to give each other some of the institutional knowledge we've been able to pick up over however many years. I mean, MG has been in this field for 15-ish years, right, something along those lines, if not longer. James Coe, same thing. Myself, Ray Garvin, Tip Major, Troy King, Laquan Jones. All of the people so far that I've listed have been in the game for at least 5, 10, 15 years. But it's not just building up the institutional knowledge base, but it's how can we now address the training aspect of it? How can we start to build up our individual skill sets? So if JJ Zachariason were to come along and say, hey, I'm looking for a co-host to maybe work with me over the next season, mm-hmm, and say, and really start to up my game from a podcast standpoint, could we have somebody that would address that skill set? Or if somebody were looking for research to be able to put together their own podcast and maybe something working behind the scenes, same thing. But it's not just so for the Cookout Group in general, it's not just about just banding together and trying to get jobs, but also being able to build people up. So once those opportunities arise, we have not just the network of connections to put people in those positions to win, but they also have the fundamental skill set in order to address some of the problems, or at least address some of the skill sets needed by a number of companies within the industry.
Yeah, look, I mean, it's awesome. And I think that from my perspective and from other people's perspectives, saying this on Late Round Perspectives, we need all of these different types of perspectives from people who are coming from all walks of life. And we haven't always had that in the fantasy football space. I think it's important to highlight that and to, let people know that there are a lot of great analysts. And even to your point, folks that aren't necessarily front facing and in front of a camera who can help out, within the space, and are very, very capable. So I at least wanted to give, that a shout. It's been something that, I've tried to be involved with over the last, if you guys go to the Fantasy Football Expo, there's a lot of great conversation around this then. And then you obviously, being this organizer of it, it was a great time to at least bring it up and let people know that it exists, who are listening to this show.
Yeah. And I think moving forward, one of the things that I do want to try and do is make sure that folks within the industry have a knowledge or understanding of who we are and what we do. And then, of course, working with folks like yourself in order to shed more of a light on it. I mean, that's really the goal. I mean, just getting the word out there so that we're bringing in more people, other folks that are new to the industry have a way to get in contact with us. And then, of course, the ultimate goal is into your point, is to be able to continue to get more and more folks out there into the industry and picking up, whether they're forward-facing jobs or jobs behind the scene. But regardless, it's about building up that skill set, and that's what we're about.
100%. All right, man, let's get into some fantasy football takes. We got, by the way, this week sucks. Oh my God, does this week suck. I'm looking at some of my teams. I'm in the Scott Fishbowl playoffs. Humble brag, of course.
I'm in too. I made it.
There we go. And literally my whole team is on bye. I have a Bengals stack. I have a Falcon stack. I'm just completely, so we're recording this before Thursday Night Football as usual. My two quarterbacks in the Superflex League this week, I have 4 quarterbacks on my team. Now 5, because I added Tommy DeVito, who's one of my quarterbacks this week. My other is Jameis, who's going tonight in what should be a terrible wet. So people are going to listen to this tomorrow, and you will know how good or bad off to a start I am based on Jameis's performance, which I am not optimistic about Jameis against Pittsburgh, but we'll see what happens. But yeah, man, it's a very, very rough week. But let's talk, instead of the week, let's talk about the season. My first question I want to ask you: what has been the most, we're 11 weeks in, this is week 12. What's been the most surprising thing to you about this fantasy football season?
I would say the most surprising thing is the running back play out of some of the guys that either we had left, not necessarily left for dead because they were all higher ADP picks, but for players that we had some concerns about and didn't know how they were going to shake out, or for even guys that we thought would have high-end production, but they got there in different ways. And the four examples that come to mind are Saquon Barkley, Joe Mixon, Derrick Henry, and Devon Achane. And so now with Achane specifically, the bet that we were making over the offseason was that his rushing efficiency that he flashed in his 2023 season would be a larger part of the equation for 2024. Everybody remembers the game where the Dolphins dropped 70 points on the Broncos. Yeah. It was an excellent show, but of course afterwards it was like Achane got hurt, Raheem Mostert getting the 20-plus touchdowns. And so with him having a healthy offseason, we expected him to take a larger part of the workload and then move on from there. But it hasn't really been that way from a rushing standpoint. The rushing efficiency just hasn't been there for him, but he's been able to make up for it as a receiver.
Right.
Now, if you read one of the prospect guides that's out there in the industry right now, somebody on this podcast noted that Devon Achane, who had a 16.4% reception share coming out of college, this was in his range of outcomes. There's obviously a potential for him, but because we looked at the Dolphins offense as being led by Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, having Achane potentially be the team's wide receiver 2, 2B, however you want to categorize him, that just wasn't in a lot of people's thought process. So it's one of those, you got the right result, but you got there in a different way,
100%.
Or you got there in a way that you didn't expect it to. Almost the same way like Joe Mixon. A lot of folks were making the bet that, okay, well, we're gonna take this bet that CJ Stroud, just one of the best rookie quarterbacks that we've seen. Of course, he beat Joe Burrow, because I'm still not bitter about that at all. But he beat Joe Burrow. He's better than Joe Burrow, and he's going to be one of the better pocket passers. And this is going to be this high efficiency passing game from the Texans. And so Joe Mixon taking over the lion's share of that backfield, carrying the mail for one of the better offenses in the league. We got Nico Collins, we got Stephon Diggs, Tank Dell in his second year. I mean, it's going to be great. And that was the bet that we were making. Lo and behold, Tank Dell gets shot over the offseason. Stephon Diggs tears his ACL midway through the season, and the passing game crumbles around him to the point where we've had at least some concerns about CJ Stroud as a passer. Completion percentage over expectation has taken a dip. Passing success rate has taken a dip. But lo and behold, Joe Mixon has been the force behind the Houston's offense throughout the entirety of the season. The revenge tour for Joe Mixon from a rushing efficiency standpoint was not something that anybody expected, especially people that are Bengals fans, looking at his production over the past couple of seasons. So those guys, and of course, when you mix in Derrick Henry at his age, going to the Ravens, doing what he's done, having a top 3 workload, I mean, all-time top 3 workload, and putting up the production that he has. Saquon Barkley butt hurdling over people to the point where they had to put him into the Madden game. Did you see that? Thing.
I did.
Yeah. So I mean, those types of things where right now we can look back at it in hindsight and be like, oh yeah, these are all things that we would the production should have been there for them, but it's just how they got there and what they've been able to do with their opportunities. It's really has been one of the things that stood out to me so far during the 2024 season.
Yeah. I love the way that you frame that, because I think that a common theme throughout what you just said is how and this is something I talked about with Jacob Gibbs last week on the show, and how he, from a metric standpoint, largely doesn't care about, and I've talked about this for years, where people will say, last year it was fade Rachaad White because he was a horrible rookie season. He had a horrible rookie season on the ground. He's really inefficient. And, it's I don't really care about how good or bad a running back performs on the ground from an efficiency standpoint, unless it is truly horrific, right? Absolutely, obviously, you're not any good at this game. If you have an additional skill set of some sort and you're showing that inefficiency, and their skill set, I'm not even saying just as a receiver, right? For Rachaad White, that's why he was able to find the field last year, and why he was able to be an RB1 or whatever he finished last year in fantasy football. But Joe Mixon, for instance, Mixon, to your point, horrible efficiency numbers over the final. I mean, basically, realistically, throughout his time in Cincinnati, he had pretty bad efficiency numbers, no matter how you sort of frame it. But I do think that there's just this from a fantasy analyst perspective, we don't talk enough about the ability to just handle a big workload and how coaches just love that, right? Najee Harris being a great example of this, who again plays tonight. But Najee Harris, he's the 1A in that backfield for sure at this point. Like we know that because Jaylen Warren's been healthy now. And everyone, number one, he's been better, right, this year than even, last year he was okay, but the year before that it was really, really bad. But, it's just one of those things where like with running backs in particular, we have to put our brains in the coach's brains, if you will. Like we have to think about how the coaches are thinking because they're dictating volume 100%. Like how they deploy a backfield is what matters the most. Like we can say, I really love this guy, and we can hope, I always go back to like Aaron Jones when he was when he was a rookie for Green Bay or at least a younger player for Green Bay, and they had some inefficiency ahead of him. And I'm just sitting there and I'm like, play Aaron Jones. He's good. I really like, and sometimes you get that emerging talent that just kind of takes over and is able to overcome because of strictly talent, right? I think we were starting to see that a little bit with Chase Brown, right? With Chase Brown versus Zach Moss, you're sitting there and you're like, Zach Moss is better in pass pro. It's like, okay, well, Chase Brown is better everywhere else. So we might as well just try to get him the ball a little bit more, right? And so I think that like the way we look at running backs might really shift after this year. Like I've tried to be this way, throughout my time, especially the last handful of years, because I've just looked at data and have seen that, running back efficiency just is so volatile. Now, did I expect Devon Achane to be one of the least efficient runners in the league after literally breaking a record last year in yards per carry? No, like we don't have to like project that to happen, but we can project regression, right? We can project some of those things to go on. Let me ask a follow-up to this. There's been a lot of chatter about age in the running back position, and a lot of the guys you just mentioned are, quote, older running backs that we typically would avoid. Now, there's been a narrative, especially this week, because, Joe Mixon had a monster game. Derrick Henry's done his thing all year. Saquon Barkley's done his thing all year. There's been a lot of chatter, at least that I've seen on social media this week, saying people faded these guys and they were older, and now look what they're doing. They're burning all the people who faded. My response to that, and you can, like, I'd love to hear your reaction, but my response to that is that age was maybe a part of that evaluation. But to me, like, people were off of Saquon not because he was older, but they were worried about what Jalen Hurts might do at the goal line. Or people were off on Joe Mixon for the things that you just mentioned about the Texans offense and more than likely being a little bit more pass heavy than actually what happened. Or people were off of Derrick Henry. Maybe that was age related to some degree, but but like, I don't think it's just an age thing. I think we need to have a little bit more nuance here. Do you agree with that?
Oh, 100%. I mean, context has to be applied in every situation. And for this, just summarily saying because they were older and they weren't going to perform well, I think it's a little bit reductive. Yeah. Because if you were to tell me that an older running back is going to go to any team but get all of the touches, I'd be like, okay, well, now I'm interested. Because but now tell me more. Is it now going to be in a situation where the quarterback is likely going to get most of the carries once they get inside the 5 and up to the like the 1 yard line, especially for Saquon Barkley? Okay, well, now I'm a little bit less interested. And also, does the same running back have a history of having a few injuries here and there that's going to have him out in multiple games, which has been a part of Saquon Barkley's history over the past 2 to 3 years? Yeah. Okay, well, I guess I'm a little bit less interested now. So I wouldn't say that age is the only factor. And then you mentioned Joe Mixon's rushing inefficiencies throughout his time in Cincinnati, but now you're going to tell me he's going to go to a team that we're expecting to be a bit more pass happy or pass friendly, and most of the offensive production is going to be based off of the quarterback's shoulder and his ability to pass downfield versus Joe Mixon's rushing. All right, so then I'm a little bit less interested in that as well. Yeah. So it's not just the fact that those guys were older. It was the situations that we're going into that didn't lend itself to running back rushing production. And I say running back rushing production because, of course, with Jalen Hurts being there, of course, the ground game was going to be there. But how much did we really expect Saquon Barkley to be a part of it? So I guess age, yes, definitely plays a part of it, but it's not just that. It's about the situations that they were finding themselves in. That's why, again, it's so surprising to see them produce so well, just given the way that the season's shaken out for pretty much all of them.
Yeah, and I think it's okay to say that, I remember I did a mailbag right before the season started, and I remember talking about Saquon and his goal line work, and I mentioned that DeAndre Swift last year was actually he got a lot of volume at the goal line, his and looking back in hindsight, I wish I was pretty much at market with Saquon. I wish I would have taken that and run with it, right? And just said like in hindsight, of course, I wish I was higher on Saquon Barkley, than I actually was. But I just think that dumbing it down to simply age, especially when the market didn't like fade these dudes,
right.
Especially in like more like home leagues and stuff. I guarantee you Saquon and Derrick Henry were like 1-2 turn type picks, pretty consistently. So
yeah, it'd be one thing if we as a fantasy football community said that we're out on these guys because of age, and then the cost reflected that.
Right.
Because if all like 3 of those guys were round 6, 7, 8, 9 picks, and then this happened, okay, sure. We can point the finger at all of us and say, you guys said that they were too old and they can't do it and we're not going to play these guys. But they were all early round picks, all of them.
Right.
So there had to have been some sense of optimism, or at least the context or the common sense applied to, well, if these things break right, they have the ability to be your top 12 running backs out of the season. That was still clearly based off of their ADPs. Mm-hmm. That was still a part of the analysis, but it was just taking into account that, yes, they're older. Yes, they have had this potential injury history, like for Barkley specifically, or these things that might not lend itself to them winding up in the top 12 at the end of the season. But at least given their price, the upside for all of them was definitely baked into how we were looking at them throughout draft season.
Yeah. And it's not like we failed to recognize that there was a ceiling for these guys. That's the thing that like I get kind of irritated about whenever we like start having these conversations on social or what have you. It's like we're only looking at one outcome that happened, right? We're only looking at what actually went down when there are many other things that could hypothetically go down. And if you ignore those things, then I think that you're putting yourself in trouble in the future. And I think this leads to my next question, which, based on what we've seen this year, is there anything that you think you'll be able to take advantage of in next year's draft? Based on how guys are performing, based on the general sentiment around fantasy football and how people are kind of viewing these positions.
So at least I'll switch positions here, because instead of looking at the running back position, the way I was thinking about this one was, look at how mad everybody is about the tight end position this year, especially the folks that invested in the early round tight ends. Of course, some of them over time, I mean, we're going into week 12, almost like 3 months into the season, and we've seen at least an uptick in work from Trey McBride. Hasn't scored a rush or a receiving touchdown yet, but at least he has gotten into the box as a runner. But Travis Kelce has popped up for a few games. George Kittle, when he's healthy, has been okay. Kyle Pitts has popped up for a game here or two, but still, it's large. Like by and large, if you invest in an early round tight end, you're probably kind of upset with the return.
Sure.
And so at least I'm looking at that, at the fragility of the position, and trying to rethink how I'm going to look at things from a year-to-year basis. And like a couple of situations really had me thinking about this. It's the one for the Detroit Lions and then also for the Ravens. Now, we can look at how Sam Laporta and Mark Andrews have done. Sam Laporta just had the 1 year, but we have at least a couple of seasons from Mark Andrews, and their targets per route run, their air yard share, any advanced metric that would highlight how good they've been when targeted. And that's why a lot of folks wanted to push them up into the early rounds. I completely understand that. However, if we look at what the teams were trying to tell us in terms of what they wanted to see out of their passing game as a whole, and I would contextualize or at least apply this context to a lot of the players that we're going to at least try and target for next year, I can see why, and this is obviously with the gift of hindsight, how things have gone the way they have. So for Sam Laporta, Jameson Williams, and the team drafted him like with the high round pick that they wanted to. The hope would be that coming off the injury and then also the gambling suspension, he would turn into the wide receiver 2 that he has so far this season. And even with the in-game or in-season suspension, what was it, 2 weeks ago, Jameson Williams walked right back into a 20% target share. Yeah. He has functioned as the wide receiver 2 that the Lions wanted him to be. So I can see why Sam Laporta hasn't been used as much. And the team told us as much when they drafted Jameson Williams. They wanted somebody to go alongside of Amon-Ra St. Brown. And so then the same thing for Mark Andrews. We've seen this shift or this evolution in how Zay Flowers has been used. He hasn't been this shorter A-dot type of receiver as he was in his rookie season. Seen more intermediate targets for Zay Flowers, more targets across the middle of the field, and those explosives that he's been able to create with Lamar Jackson. That's also with the addition of, or at least the emergence of, Isaiah Likely down the back end of last season. We knew that the Ravens wanted to have a more diversified passing game while still wanting to feature Lamar Jackson and, of course, Derrick Henry in the running game. So it's like with those two specifically, it's like what is the team trying to tell us as to, like, what they want their passing game to be? I mean, we all look at Travis Kelce and his usage with Patrick Mahomes as like the gold standard. Like once you find your receiving tight end that has this high-end target share, those are the guys that you want to go after. And from a history standpoint, that makes sense because at least last year as a proxy, it was like of the top 6 tight ends last year, 5 of those 6 had target shares like at or above 20%. And so if you were just copy and paste like those stats into this year, that's how you saw Sam Laporta, Mark Andrews, Trey McBride, all of those guys being in at the top end of ADP, at least for the tight end position. But now I'm trying to like fast forward this to 2025, and I'm thinking through, for a guy like Trey McBride, will we be having this exact same conversation about the disappointment with Trey McBride if Marvin Harrison Jr. develops into the wide receiver that we want? Those are the kinds of things that I'm thinking about, is that I can see why Dalton Kincaid isn't as much of a factor in the Bills offense, because they wanted Keon Coleman to get involved. They wanted Khalil Shakir to get involved a bit more. And so like thinking about how not just the tight end usage, but the context of the usage within their offense as a whole, those are the things that I want to try and apply to 2025 and moving forward, versus just saying this guy gets a high number of targets, this is the way they were used last year, and just summarily saying that the way that they used last year is definitely, without a doubt, unequivocally going to be the way that they're going to be used in the years moving forward.
Yeah, I think that like, and I mentioned this on the mailbag last week that I did, because someone had asked about like tight ends being such a disappointment and an abomination and stuff. And, while I agree in some, I think that there still needs to be a recognition that, number one, we had this like anchoring bias based on, because it was real bad after like week 2, like real bad, right? Like they had like 8 total tight end touchdowns across the league after the first 2 weeks of the season. It was horrific. Like we had never seen anything like that. And so, but if you look at it, like every single player, every single tight end that was drafted this year had some sort of wart, right? Like some sort of like question mark. Like Sam Laporta, in my opinion, I had talked about this on the show. Like he had some regression coming, at least from like a touchdown perspective. And I think his usage is pretty surprising still. I think that your point about JMO and stuff is definitely valid, but his usage is still surprising based on how we felt to start the season with Laporta, right? And then you look at like Trey McBride. Okay, we don't have a massive sample on him. Or you look at Travis Kelce, where you're like, okay, he's getting older. And I almost feel like we're assuming that these guys were drafted in the first 2 rounds like we typically have seen these elite tight ends get drafted. But to me, those warts brought their ADP down at least to like semi-respectable levels, like to round 4 and into round 5 and stuff like that. And like I look at it and I'm like, I haven't looked at like how well they're exceeding ADP expectation. I haven't plugged into the little formula that I have or anything like that yet. But like Travis Kelce, now that Rashee Rice has been out, has been, aside from last week, has been good, right? Like he's been a good asset. Or Trey McBride has been great. And imagine if he was scoring touchdowns. I mean, he would be having a monster season. George Kittle, who was top 6 from an ADP perspective, according to Fantasy Pros, is having the best season of his career, like from a fantasy perspective. And then, Kyle Pitts has as you mentioned, kind of probably we would consider him a bust, more of a bust than a hit. Dalton Kincaid, definite bust, right? But to me, when I look at like take a step back and look at the landscape, has it really gone a way that we didn't totally expect, like in totality? Like if we really think, because like Trey McBride, Travis Kelce, who else am I? George Kittle, right? Those guys have been relatively okay. If you have them in your starting lineup in PPR formats, they've been relatively okay. maybe they're not matching like a round 1, round 2 tight end by ADP historically, but they've been like okay enough. And then obviously Brock Bowers is the massive hit at the position that you got sort of in low end tight end 1 range. And David Njoku's been really good post Amari Cooper. Again, he's playing tonight. I always have to say that in case folks, if something happens. But like late round tight ends haven't really come to fruition aside from Cade Otton this year, right. Like, and I just wonder, like, do you think that ADP at tight end next year, to me, it might just look the exact same as it did this year. Like I'm talking like we get some third round, maybe 1 third rounder, maybe Brock Bowers like a second rounder or something, but we get like, but then we get like, maybe a McBride at the end of round 3, and then, maybe Kittle goes in 4 or into 5, and Kelsey's up there where Kittle is and stuff. And to me, like, that's basically the market telling us that they're not expecting, aside from a Brock Bowers, to really be that elite. And so we're going to have hits and we're going to have misses, as opposed to if they are a first round pick and they bust, that's bad. That's really bad because the opportunity cost is so high. So I do wonder, like, do you think that there's a possibility that next season people are just going to be so far out on elite tight ends based on perception and based on the fact that, like, historically we've seen elite, quote unquote, elite tight ends hit at a really, really good rate, but they were also drafted in rounds 1 and 2, right? When we're talking like Gronk and Kelsey and sometimes Andrews. But last year in 2024, I'm speaking from a 2025 perspective. Last year, some of them hit, some of them didn't. And then I think, though, that because the expectation was so high based on what we've seen historically, even with the decreased ADP in 2024, I almost feel like people are just going to be like, nah, I'm going to stream, give me Tucker Kraft late, I'm good to go. Do you think that that's a possibility here?
Yeah, I think it's possible that people will still approach whatever priors folks had or whatever their strategic approach to drafting tight ends were this year. I think it's still going to hold true for the next year. I think if people went into this season saying, I want to find one of the elite tight ends, and they'll just look at us as us being like the fantasy analyst community to say, well, tell me who are the top 6 from this season. And then I'll just make my draft strategy around grabbing one of those guys. Right. And then everybody else is going to be like, well, I can still find a Cade Otton at the back end of my draft, or I'm still going to be looking for the tight end middle class. Like I'll be still drafting David Njoku or Hunter Henry, or I'll try and find the next year's like Noah Fant, even though he hasn't really done much of anything, but all of those guys. And I'll be listening to the late round podcast and then just complaining about like whatever suggestion Denny told me to pick up that wound up completely trashing my lineup the next week. And I'll just blame Denny like afterwards. Yeah, of course. And that's probably what's going to happen, because to your point, if there were more late round tight ends that were producing or consistently producing at the same level as your Travis Kelce's or any of those guys, then I think the whole market would then shift
100%
and then get flipped on its head. But unless you can tell me that you're going to be able to identify the late round tight end for next year that's going to turn out like Cade Otton, who, again, let's add in some context that needed 2 supremely high-end wide receivers die on the field in order to get to where he's at.
Exactly.
And also in an offense that wound up having one of the higher pass rate over expectations. That's dropped down over the past couple of weeks, but like that's what needed to happen in order to get Cade Otton to where he's at. Right. So just say like, hey, I'm just going to draft next year's Cade Otton. Well, cool. You tell me where that's at, and then we'll tell nobody else.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Exactly.
But still, I would say that's the thing that I would push back on, just saying, well, I'm not going to draft high-end tight ends, and then I'll just wait for the late round sleeper that is going to give me the edge over everybody else, because that's just not the case. I did a study for the Fantasy Life magazine over this year looking at tight end sleepers, and at least for the top 6 tight ends over the past, and this is like 4 to 5 years. I mean, you've need like about an average, like your target share being around like somewhere between 15 and 20%, having a high end targets per route run and route share, and like getting out there and running routes. I mean, target share alone has a 0.62 R squared to PPR points. That's over the last 4 seasons of data. So if you're not earning targets, none of this stuff even matters.
Right.
So at least taking hits or taking swings on guys that are at least earning targets, that's typically the way that you're going to find one of those guys that's going to wind up in the top 6 of tight ends. It's just for this season, especially at the start of it, we didn't get that. But I think for most of those guys, again, we're probably going to be having the same conversation, or that same group of tight ends are going to be the ones that are going to have that high end ADP for 2025. And we're just going to have to, again, contextualize the situations and see who the best out of that bunch is really going to be.
Yeah, which is what I think happened this year, right? Like I feel like, you know, like I remember writing in my draft guide that one of the predictive things that I found for top 6 tight ends was if they had a previous yards per route run rate that was above a certain threshold. I think it was like 1.5 or something like that. And the tight ends that were in the top 6 historically, there weren't many, but even a top 12. The tight ends who had low yards per route run rates the previous season did not hit at a very good rate at all the next season. And 2 of the tight ends that I called out were Dalton Kincaid and Kyle Pitts. They were, now I understand that it was scary at the time, but it was one of the things that made me not go overboard in drafting them this year, was because there are some predictive signs like that should scare you a little bit. Now, you know, were they in unique circumstances and stuff? Yeah, of course. You know, Kyle Pitts had the quarterback upgrade. Dalton Kincaid was a rookie, and very rarely do we see second year guys at tight end, you know, get that kind of draft capital in terms of ADP. But, you know, there are some things, like I said, there were warts in all of these players. And it's just funny that I feel like the consensus sentiment is we sucked at tight end this year, right? But we didn't. Like, look at the late round tight ends. We were right. The late round tight ends have not been good. Like, you know, we gotten Jonnu Smith and we've gotten Will Dissly, but, you know, I understand that, but they're likely not going to be matching the guys who we did draft earlier who did end up hitting, which is maybe like a 50% rate or something like that, all things considered. So, you know, I think especially if you remove Brock Bowers from the equation, like Brock Bowers, 100%, like, you know, he probably went late in some home league drafts and stuff like that. He was a massive hit. He was the best value at tight end by far this year. It's not even close, right?
Sure. Yeah.
But like, I don't want to, you know, I don't think that we can just use like a generational talent and be like, that's the way that we need to draft moving forward, because we're not going to see a Brock Bowers every year. We're not going to see that kind of ADP happen from him every year, you know? So no. I think we were actually like, I don't know, maybe this sounds crazy. I just don't think that we were that bad with tight ends this year versus how people talk about it.
No, and for Brock Bowers specifically, like, yes, you can look at the collegiate production for Bowers, look at how he tested, like, from an athleticism standpoint, and say, oh yeah, no, duh, he should have been the hit that we expected him to be. But look at his run out. Of course, earlier in the season, of course, the target share was going to be there, but no Davante Adams, no real like wide receiver 2 to note of. Jacoby Myers is still a serviceable wide receiver 1 by volume only, but now this has been like, he's now a part of an offense that's essentially, and also he got drafted to a team that also had an early round tight end drafted the year prior.
Yeah.
Like he had like immediate target competition walking into the season.
Right.
And of course, folks in hindsight can point to and be like, well, he was the best talent on the offense, so it completely makes sense that he would have all these targets. But still, you didn't know that walking in. If you were to like say that this is a tight end that got drafted by the freaking Raiders and also has at least one, if not 2 potential high-end targeters in front of him, you'd be concerned. There's a reason why he was being drafted. And also he's a rookie. So like there was legitimate concern as to how things were going to shake out for him in week 1 and his rookie season. And now he's also another guy. Let's see if the Raiders want to start adding in more wide receiver talent in 2025. And let's have the same conversation that we're having about him. Like he could be the next Sam Laporta.
Yeah. I mean, look, Bowers is literally breaking like rookie reception records. And so, you know, like I think we at least need, you know, I was basically at market. This isn't like a cope at all. This is just like let's just be realistic that he's had a great run out. Like you said, lose Davante Adams, gets hyper targeted, and he's good. And so all of that combined really, really helps him out. Yeah. Let's get into some just regular player takes. First one, on the 15 transaction show this week, I called Calvin Ridley a buy. Am I an idiot?
No, I wouldn't say you're an idiot. Although earlier today, Will Levis was having a press conference and folks were asking if he thinks he's improved as a passer. And did you see his response?
I didn't know.
He said he's not passing with his left hand or performing chest passes, so he thinks he's improving. I was like, so if you're calling his wide receiver 1 a buy, and that's what his quarterback is saying, then there might be some concern. I have some concern for you, but I would say yes, Calvin Ridley I would consider him a buy. Let's put aside the craziness that's going on with the Titans passing game, but we'll look at his upcoming schedule. So we got Houston, Washington, two games against Jacksonville, Cincinnati, and Indianapolis.
Yeah.
None of those defenses or secondaries are secondaries that you want to avoid from a fantasy standpoint. Using our DVP tool over at Fantasy Life, all of them are above the in the top half of the league in fantasy points allowed to the wide receiver position. So at least that sets up Calvin Ridley for good matchups throughout the fantasy playoffs. But also, with DeAndre Hopkins out, he switched from an 18% target share that was in the earlier parts of the season to 26 over the past 4 games. And I think also it's not just the volume, but the types of targets he's been getting. His catchable target rate has jumped up. His average depth of target has gone down a bit, so less volatile targets. I mean, it's still around 15 yards, which, I mean, it makes things still a bit tougher, but at least seeing that type of usage lends itself a bit more to, all right, he's the wide receiver one, not just because he gets most of the volume, and really his next best target, or the next best target for Will Levis, is Nick Westbrook-Ikhine. But still, if he's getting most of the targets, most of the air yards, and being used in a more efficient manner, slightly more efficient manner, and he has the defensive matchups, calling Calvin Ridley a buy, I think makes some sense to me.
That's good to hear. Because there was at one point earlier in the season where I said, I think the Titans offense is their passing attack is kind of a buy right now. This is probably week 6 or something like that. And it bit me for sure, because they did not, narrator, they did not get much better as a passing attack. But I do think that things have come together for Ridley, post DeAndre Hopkins, and you brought up some really good points with some of those data points. Deebo Samuel, what's going on there? Should we be concerned?
I mean, I would be concerned, but this is one of those where I just think about it one, he had the calf injury earlier on in the season that had him sidelined. But 2, what was it? Just a few weeks ago, he had to be hospitalized because he had fluid in his lungs.
Right.
I don't know about any of you folks listening to this show, or I don't know about you, JJ. If I even have the sniffles, it's hard for me to even set my fantasy football lineup, let alone get out there and run completely, just go completely out for however many snaps that he plays on a particular game. But I would say on the flip side of that same argument, it's not like we've seen less of Deebo. His route rate has still been above 70%, and actually it's been going up over the past 3 weeks, since they before their bye and shortly thereafter. He's out there getting his cardio in. I would say though that his largest problem is this emergence of Juwan Jennings.
Right. I
mean, Juwan Jennings, he missed 2 weeks with the hip injury, immediately came back, and that was in week 10 with CMC back in the lineup, and had a 30+% target share.
Right.
I mean, which is insane. I mean, given the fact that we came into this season thinking Jennings was going to be essentially the team's wide receiver 3. And so we were talking about earlier about good runouts for tight ends and the running backs. But this run out for Jennings, I mean, no Brandon Ayuk. George Kittle has been in and out of the lineup. Same thing with Deebo Samuel. And of course, Jennings has dealt with his own ailments. But to see him have one of the better wide receiver outings of not this season, but the past 3 or 4 years, that 46-point performance that he did back in week 3. I mean, that was crazy. But now to see him follow that up with consistent usage of being above 25% of the team's targets, actually giving Deebo a run from his money in terms of opportunities from Brock Purdy, I think that's the larger concern for Deebo Samuel moving forward. And it's good to see 7, 6, and 7 targets for Deebo Samuel over his past 3 games. Still getting the opportunities in the offense, but with Jennings playing as well as he has been so far, and not just from the week 3, week 4 thing, but over the past few weeks since coming back. I mean, that's a larger concern I have for Deebo. On top of the fact that Brock Purdy has a shoulder injury, which has kept him out of practice, at least for today so far.
So I love having my prospect guide now, because I can literally see how I viewed a player as he was drafted, right? Like when he came out, this is objectively how I feel about this guy. But I didn't always have that. Right. I've only been doing that for 3 years now. And so I went back on Twitter and I looked at when I had talked about Juwan Jennings. And it was hilarious because I found a tweet that I had responded. Hayden Winks had sent a tweet out that said, "Who are your favorite wide receiver sleepers in this class?" And I named 4 of them. Okay. One of them was because he made a list, and one of the guys that was not on the list was Michael Pittman. So I said Michael Pittman was one, which is great. I got that right. And then Juwan Jennings was actually another one that I had mentioned in that tweet. And then I had 2 other ones. One was Brian Edwards, who has been a complete bust. And then the last one was Omar Bayless, who
I don't even know who that is.
I know. I sent the tweet. I put the tweet in our Discord, and everyone's like, "You just made up that guy." Like, there's
you put an NPC in a tweet.
yeah. There's no way that's a real person. But yeah, I remember, like, you know, I thought that Jauan Jennings had some juice. I didn't think that he was going to be 2.5 yards per route run kind of juice. You know, like, he's been absolutely destroying this year, but it's been good to see. All right, let me ask you about Bo Nix. Do you think that he is just like a plug and play dude now, that you're just going to play no matter what, don't care about the matchup moving forward? And then a follow-up to that, this is kind of dynasty, maybe just like real football related, but do you think that we should be viewing Bo Nix higher than Caleb Williams?
Oof, higher than Caleb Williams. All right, I'll answer the first question first, and I'll get to the second one. Plug and play starter for the rest of the season, yes. Regardless of the matchup so far, like outside of the early parts of the season, Bo Nix has performed as like at least in the top 16 category. Because surprisingly enough, for as much hype as he's received, I think Bo Nix has only had 4 top 12 finishes so far this year. Yeah. And that's even with like the rushing and stuff included. So relative to his peers, I think he's played well enough that we should consider him a plug and play type of starter. And that's primarily because of the rushing, the short ADOT, and like his passing efficiency is still something to consider. And that's why, again, when I talk about Caleb Williams, I'll have a few more notes about that. But especially this week, going up against the Raiders, and Raiders don't generate a bunch of pressure as it is, but still, I mean, right now, like Bo Nix, I think he has like he's top 10 in scramble rate, like win under duress, and he's also one of 4 quarterbacks in the league so far with double-digit rushing first downs, like if pressured. And it's just Bo Nix, it's Jaden Daniels, it's Brock Purdy, and it's Jalen Hurts. I mean, so if he's up there with those guys from a rushing standpoint, I mean, he should be somebody that you should want to have in your lineup for the remainder of the season. I think the problem that I had, and I was trying to think about this, like, why wasn't I really like more into Bo Nix like during draft season? I think it was because of the passing acumen, or this lack of skill set compared to the other quarterbacks in this class. I mean, think about Drake May. We knew he was going to get have the rushing portion with him coming out of UNC, but it was going to be like he would be more of the upside would be the ceiling case would be there for May as a passer. And coming from that air raid system in North Carolina, if he let the ball loose to any of the guys that we were interested in, whether it was Jalen Polk, Tyquan Thornton, even though like he got kicked out, Javon, I mean, any of the pass catchers we're interested in, that would allow May to enable his ceiling. Same thing with Jaden Daniels, and of course the same thing with Caleb Williams. That wasn't the case for Bo Nix. He had one of the lower average passing ADOTs compared to the rest of his classmates. And also thinking about it from a draft standpoint, so much of the things that we want to do from a draft strategy is correlate our rosters. So if you draft the quarterback, you want to get the wide receiver that would go with him, or even the tight end. JJ, you tell me, which wide receiver do you really want to draft or pick up and start with Bo Nix? I mean, outside of Cortland Sutton, it's just been this mix of Lil Jordan Humphrey, Troy Franklin, Devon Vele, Lucas Kroll, Adam Troutman, Dayton's finest. But like it's just been a mix of all these guys. So without having like a standard set of just like, or even a condensed set of pass catchers, trying to figure out who to play Bo Nix with has probably been the reason I've been out on him so far. But still, if you get the rushing production, you get at least functional passing production out of Bo Nix, and his upcoming matchups are enough such that like he should be in consideration for the rest of the playoffs. But compared to Caleb Williams, that's where that's tough for me for folks that are in the dynasty streets. Yeah, because at least seeing Caleb Williams limit negative plays, let the ball loose and really start to connect with Rome Odunze downfield, seeing at least some production out of DJ Moore. We at least got those two guys, because I'm assuming Keenan Allen is not going to be in the long-term picture for Chicago. So if we're at least seeing him take that step forward in terms of limiting negative plays, his 13% scramble rate just this past week, I think was second highest for him for the entire season. So if we're seeing him start to create out of structure, hit some plays downfield, connecting with what we assume is going to wind up being his wide receiver one in Odunze, like over the course of his career. Yeah. I would still give the edge to Caleb Williams from a dynasty standpoint, but I can understand after a 3-month sample for Bo Nix, why at least we should be having the conversation about which one you would want to roster for dynasty.
Yeah. I mean, look, I'm not as big of a quarterback evaluator as I am running back and wide receiver and such. I don't have modeled, none of that. It's just difficult. But with Bo Nix, that I think, it's going to be, I just feel like it's going to be one of those situations that's very similar to how everyone viewed Brock Purdy, where, not to say that he's going to be Brock, because I think Brock Purdy is like legit good, like very good, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if we can necessarily just assume that that's the outcome for Bo Nix, but what I do think is going to happen is people have a hard time not separating a scheme and environment with the quarterback. And I think everyone kind of knew intuitively, like, Bo Nix going with Sean Payton and merging that talent and that skill set did make sense. And we're already seeing that right now. You mentioned, like, his ADOT's been wasn't last week like 3.5 or something, like it was very, very low, and he's just letting his receivers do his thing. But that's kind of what we've seen out of the Payton offense historically.
It's like career Drew Brees.
Yeah, right. Like there's nothing there's nothing wrong with someone doing the right things within the structure that he's given, right? And that's what I'm trying not to ding Bo Nix for. But I do think that, to your point, like, Caleb Williams still, to me, has the ceiling of the two. But, I think it's at least a conversation where I don't think at all it was, like, to me, like, Drake May might end up being the QB1 in this. Like, he's been really, really good. But I think it's Jaden Daniels, Drake May, and then you start to get into this conversation of these two guys. But, it's definitely an interesting conversation, at least, to have.
Yeah, and especially for Drake May, let's see in 2025 where this is the part that becomes even tougher for me as a Bengals fan. Let's see, after Cincinnati lets T. Higgins walk, there have already been links to the Patriots going to New England. So if he has at least a budding wide receiver prospect in Jalen Polk, we'll see, like, Hunter Henry is always a solid tight end to have, like, at your side. And then if you get a wide receiver 1 in T for next season, I would already assume that May's ADP for redraft purposes is going to be fairly high after this season. They had somebody like T, we're probably going to have to be paying early round prices for him in 2025.
Yeah, I mean, they have Demario Douglas out of the slot, who's a great slot guy. He's like a diet Josh Downs, basically. Like,
more or less, yeah.
He's like that's who Drake May played with in college. It's been sort of like the connection that I've made with Douglas. We just aren't seeing, like, monster games out of him yet because I don't think the offense is just capable of that. But
that offensive line, I think, needs a lot of rework. I think, what was it? Jacoby Brissett was on pace to at least beat out Sam Howell's sack rate at one point from last season with the number of hits he was taking. So they make some changes there, invest in the wide receiver position. I mean, they get a guy like T in the building. I mean, it's just like wheels up for May in 2025.
Yeah, they can get that true one. All right, I'm going to ask you one more question before we head out here, because we are, we're talking a lot because we're buddies, so it's easy to just kind of go back and forth for a while. Are there any, like, lower key players right now who you think have a chance to be league winners down the stretch?
Low key guys that at least have a chance to get hot down the stretch. I don't know about low key, but I would say the one guy that I'm looking forward to seeing how things shake out for him is Bucky Irving, running back for the Buccaneers. I know that Todd Bowles has come out and said they want to at least try and ride the hot hand. So without, like, fully endorsing him, at least giving the room or giving the edge to Irving throughout the remainder of the season. And we've seen so far him start to work in ahead of Rachaad White as the lead ball carrier, but at least White has still been able to maintain his role as the pass catcher. I was actually kind of surprised to see Sean Tucker not really get involved after seeing him come up with a couple of games early in the year. But if now the Bucs backfield is going to condense to White and Irving for the foreseeable future, we know Irving is the more efficient rusher. We know he's the more explosive runner out of the two. So from a down-to-down, play-to-play basis, Irving should be the guy we hope to see, or we should see a bit more of. And if he gets even a little bit more of that passing game, I mean, like, he should be the guy that I'm really interested to see how things shake out for him down the stretch. And they got some pretty good matchups too, at least that would lend itself to rushing production.
Yeah, unbelievable matchups for them. He was a buy for me this week on 15 transactions, so I'm in lockstep. It's a great call out. Chris, this was amazing. Always love chopping it up with you. Let everyone know where they can find you and what you're working on, all that good stuff.
You can find me on social media at Chris Allen FFWX. Same name over on X and also Blue Sky. And then most of my work is over at Fantasy Life. I do the wide receiver cornerbacks matchup column, so most of my that written work is there. But also do multiple shows throughout the week. Mondays and Wednesdays do shows with Ian Hartitz, Dwayne McFarland, Paul Charchian, and of course the last minute Sunday morning start sit show with Matthew Friedman. But I also do a column each week over at Yahoo, just talking about some of the top storylines. So between Fantasy Life, Yahoo, the Fantasy Life YouTube channel, you can check all of my work out at those 3 spots.
I just realized how many Fantasy Life folks I brought on the show over the last like month and a half, because I had Dwayne on in like early October, I think it was. I had Charch on a couple weeks ago, and now and now you. But it's cool though, because you guys all bring a really different flavor to, you know, like Charch and I were able to talk guillotine a lot, of course. And, you know, Dwayne is going to be the like Dwayne and I just ended up just talking about literally just some of the data stuff that he's worked on and whatnot for the entire time, which I guess you and I probably could have done the exact same thing given your nerdiness with all this stuff too.
Oh yeah.
But it's cool that you guys really bring a lot of different viewpoints to the table, which is cool. And it's, you know, credit to what's being built over there at Fantasy Life. As usual, you guys can find me over on lateround.com and on Twitter and on Blue Sky at lateroundqb. Thanks for listening, everyone. Oh, wait, I got to say, thanks for tuning in.